would be a 45% decline from the February 19th high, which certainly would put us into the range of the 1960s.
Look no further. With Free Tax USA, your federal filing is always free, and state returns are under $20, no matter your tax.
David Zervos, Jefferies Chief Market Strategist, joins us here at Post 9. Well, that's the question after last week. If we can still have this bright future, you've been very optimistic with the way that the White House is going about the trade rebalance. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm optimistic about the long-run goals. I think we can all agree that having our trade in better balance and having our fiscal situation in better balance are noble and admirable goals. The speed with which you do that is the question in the market, and myself
and the how,
included.
Right? Those tariff rates were surprising. The reciprocal rates.
Right. But again, that's art of the deal. Put all the leverage with the president and then try to drive it back. That's the standard methodology. But again, I think the market sees chainsaws when it comes to fiscal cutting. The market sees almost a chainsaw-like approach to how he's going after trade, and they get very nervous. You can't just pull these structural these structures in the economy for decades, our fiscal largesse and our trade imbalances out without the patient kind of squealing, and that's what the patient just did. So it's speed. It's the speed with which we do it, and I think they've kind of seemed to have tempered it back a little bit, but we'll see. I mean, we'll see how the negotiations
It's not just
go.
the market that's concerned, though. It's CEOs, it's those who allocate capital, obviously, in the market, but it's also people who are making decisions about what to spend, how to spend it, and worried about demand going away fairly quickly in anticipation of whatever may be coming as they sit there with this uncertainty.
Well, David, if you run a company and you've got contracts with all your customers and you don't know, are they going to be affected by all of the unwinded Doge? Are they going to be affected by the trade policy reset? You're going to pull back a little bit, wait. And you also don't even know, maybe we've talked about a lot of fraud inside of the Doge thing with, all of these findings. It's still going. I think people just hang back and they say, you know what? They're doing it. That's great. That's great news. But if it affects my counterparties, I need to be careful because I don't know what customers are going to be affected. If you run a big business in and around the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, you might have a lot more people affected than if you're in another city in the United States. So I think people are just naturally cautious. And I'm going to go back to it and say it again. I don't think I wouldn't have believed there are many rational folks out there that said it's not a good idea to reset our fiscal agenda. It's not a good idea to reset our trading agenda, international trade agenda. It's the speed with which we've done it.
No, it's not just that, David. It's the how they're doing it too. The execution of the trade reset. I mean, the fact that those reciprocal tariffs were basically made up on the formula, the fact that they are very high, and I get it, they want to negotiate better deals, but it's hard to negotiate against those numbers when it's unclear. So they want to end trade deficits with countries like Vietnam. That doesn't make any sense, and also could plunge American companies and American economy into recession, which would negate the whole purpose of trying to invest in manufacturing in the U.S.
So there's no science in the economics of international trade. Anybody that gets on the show or gets on Twitter or gets on whatever X and says this is the formula, this is what we should use, nobody knows. There's no formulas in economics. It's an art. It's not a science. And the art was, let's come up with something that sort of represents how fair or unfair the current agreements and the current structure might be, and probably go bigger. And then the announcement is go bigger. And that's where they went big. But that is, I think, classic Trump style. So again, I'm not that surprised how big it was, and I'm a little surprised how much the market got nervous about his traditional negotiating style. But again, I just go back to
It's the weeks and months that may go by before we really see whether things are negotiated down to a level that you may anticipate that are going to keep executives, for example, sitting on their hands, not making decisions or worrying about a slowdown in demand. And that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy pretty easily.
It can, and there's no doubt that in this game theory approach that we've been working with our clients to try to better understand this, that you can go to a very uncooperative outcome because you go too aggressive with everybody and they rebel and they do things to go and just kind of cut off their nose to spite their face because they just feel jilted, they feel upset. So yes, there's a lot of risks with taking.
Yeah, listen, the direction of travel of the administration on fairer trading system, more efficient government, lower taxes, more rational regulatory policy, certainly relative to the past administration's approaches, is something the business community has supported. But the speed of action and the methods of executing the policies have caused great concern and destruction of value, and it creates a duration risk, like having a long-term bond that is out there, and the short-term spike in interest rates causes the reduction in the value of the long-term bond. You have to meet those short-term needs of new liquidity, new changes of directions. Your margins are hit, but you just can't do it quickly. That long-term supply chain and the long-term operations of companies are difficult to readjust in this time period, which means that businesses will have to pass on in some manner the cost of these higher. You don't want to think of a tariff as a tax. It's a higher cost on business that has to be borne by somebody, and they're figuring out how to try and do that.
You sit on the board of 4 publicly traded companies, J.P. Morgan, Johnson &
Right, because if there is an alternative to a U.S. company right now that can efficiently provide a service or a product, those foreign counterparties are looking for alternatives because of the scenario of dealing with the United States and the uncertainty here. So making sure, remember, most companies, or at least the largest companies, more than 50% of their revenues comes from overseas, and that's still a very important market for us. And we don't know where that retaliation is going to be. The last point would be, we're trying to just convey to the administration factually what will happen with these higher costs and what it will mean to us and how we're going to have to change our behavior, so it doesn't become an ideological issue. Factually, they understand what the implications of these are.
Mark, the jobs report that we got last week was actually a pretty good number. It was a month ago, so it's backward looking. Are the companies that you know of, are they stopping or freezing or slowing down on their hiring plans? Is this going to show up in the jobs market?
Good question. I think it really depends on the company, but I would say absolutely. You're looking at all your costs and trying to adjust to the current policies and where you expect them to go. What are you slowing down? I mean, in big financial institutions, the M&A and the products are changing that we thought were becoming a market. And the assumptions we're making about the unemployment rate, the assumptions we're making about the growth rate are changing. That will affect outlook. But I don't think you're going to see a lot of prediction of specific earnings per share and revenue guidance, because it's going to be very hard to do that.
If you've recently been injured in a car accident that wasn't your fault, I've got one question for you. Do you know how to get the maximum compensation that you deserve in the shortest time possible without jumping through countless hoops, chasing down firm after firm, or paying crazy attorney fees? I'm about to show you how I got this $50,000 check that I'm about to deposit into my bank account for an accident I was involved in just 5 months ago.
Our next guest says not so fast. Let's bring in Laura Martin. She's senior analyst at Needham. Laura, by the way, I mean, look, $350, $120, that's not as bad as estimates that the iPhone could cost $3,500. So the numbers do seem a little bit all over the place.
I mean, I think the thing that's incredibly important about tariffs is that they add about 50% to the cost of Apple. And so what happens is your $7.32 EPS estimate loses $2 if actually China stays at that 54% and India stays at 26%. So it's not the revenue that's the big question that tariffs brings. Tariffs brings this big question about what are the cost of goods sold, and therefore how much falls to the bottom line and how much free cash flow does Apple have compared to what consensus estimates are. And most of us aren't changing our estimates because the situation is so fluid.
Oh, sure. Is there any way in which they can absorb this? I mean, at least in some meaningful aspect, absorb it into their bottom line?
I mean, we're assuming that they don't raise price, and they've said they're not going to raise price. So they're going to hold U.S. prices as steady as they can. But if they do that, then their costs go through the roof. Yes, they can pass 20% of the cost increase into consumers' hands. And so your iPhone, all those numbers you just gave, increased by hundreds and hundreds of dollars, which drives inflation in America. So we end up with higher bond yields.
Why don't you think this is a buying opportunity for Apple?
Oh, this isn't the worst case. This is the impact of a negative $2 on EPS for this year of $7 is where most analysts are, is only the direct impact of the Trump tariffs. If China retaliates, or if they invade Taiwan, much worse for Apple, right? So there's lots of worst cases for Apple. But again, it's just so hard to know. You know, it's so hard to know what's actually going to happen with tariffs a week from now, 4 weeks from now. You know, U.S. is 25% of the global GDP, so you know, anything that hurts trade hurts us $1 out of every $4. So
We just got a headline as well from the White House, Carolyn Leavitt at the press briefing, saying the president believes the U.S. has capability to make iPhones.
yeah, I don't think that's a thing. I mean, our estimates are that it would be 3x. Whatever you thought just quoted the price, 3x that. And you couldn't do it immediately. It takes years. India's taken like 3 years to get up to 14% of their iPhone volumes.
Right, exactly. And that's this has raised a lot of questions about the workforce, and can you literally, even if you had to turn a switch tomorrow, you know, kind of turn to the American workforce to make these phones in the same way? I don't know whether anyone can figure that question out, but this is supposed to directionally tell us what's going to happen with EPS in the meantime. And I guess, like you said, if you went from $7 to $5 this year.
So if we were moving estimates and analysts aren't moving estimates because of the uncertainty, yes, we would go from $7 to $5. And that's just on the Trump tariffs alone, not anything worse than that yet.
What are the reverberations, Laura, you think, for the rest of the companies you cover?
So consumer confidence affects everything in advertising, and advertising has 80% margins. This morning there was a study out from in last week, 43% of people, CMOs, so chief marketing officers, said they were going to cut back spending in linear TV, cut back spending in social media, and cut back spending in like analog media, like yourself, for example, because that's what they need to offset the tariff cost increase. So they have a deliverable to their parent company.
IRS e-file is now open. Snap your W-2 and file your taxes 100% free. Plus,
joining us now, Freeport McMoran Chairman and former CEO Richard Adkerson. And Richard, it's great to have you here. So many cross currents that affect your business. Obviously, there's for a while the idea that maybe domestic copper prices would be higher because of tariffs and being protected, and then now we have the tariff effect on global growth expectations as well as you have production overseas. How does this all play through your business?
So, Mike, I'm in Santiago, Chile right now at an annual gathering of the global copper industry. We have more than 2,000 people here, and everyone's shocked, concerned, uncertain about the direction where these tariffs are going. The price of copper, and copper is a very critical commodity for our economy and for the United States. The price is set by global demand and supply, and the outlook for demand is fundamentally remains very good because of the electrification of the world's economy, and there are numerous barriers to developing supply. So we're facing a looming deficit. The U.S. consumes less than 10% of the world's copper. China consumes more than 50%. So demand in China is a driving force on prices. And we are the dominant producer in the U.S., produce more than 70% of the copper here. But our mines are older, they're lower grades. We have great expansion opportunities, but it's dependent on a reasonable global price of copper.
Well, and we're showing here the countries where you do, where there is the most copper produced. Obviously, outside the U.S., the majority of it. So, are you making this case, you and your colleagues in the industry, to the administration in any way about the potential hazards of this tariff policy?
Yes, there's a proceeding going on now that's looking at applying tariffs to copper, and we have worked with the government, submitted comments on that effect. Short term, by being the predominant U.S. producer, if tariffs are placed on copper coming into the U.S., and the U.S. imports about its half of its copper needs, as a company, we produce over 70% of what's produced here. We could have some near-term benefits for our company, but longer term, there needs to be policies for our industry that support global growth. There's a lot of things. You were just talking about AI and prospects of the need for that. There's lots of reasons for copper demand to grow, and
We're just urging the government not to create these barriers to let that demand emerge.
What about impact of copper being designated a critical mineral?
Well, it definitely is a critical mineral, and it would be beneficial and appropriate for that to be reflected in the U.S. government's policy. It is something that is just needed for the economy fundamentally. Its uses are widespread, but as I've pointed out, the growing electrification of the world requires more copper. 2/3 of copper goes into electricity generation and use in some form.
Wayfair presents lighting. Get the latest looks with top fixtures at low prices and a huge lineup of floor lamps, all under $79. Shop tons of table lamps, $49 or less. Go modern, stay classic, or get weird in a good way. Plus, Wayfair has installation services and fast and free shipping over $35. All the lighting, none of the stress. Now that's a glow up. So hit the lights. Shop lighting for way less at Wayfair.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Joining us now, first on CNBC is Energy Secretary Chris Wright. Secretary Wright, welcome. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Sarah. Glad to be here.
I definitely want to get to the executive order and the AI story, but just first on crude oil, since we've seen such a sharp move lower, I wonder what you're hearing from some of the shale producers about whether if the price is high enough at this point to boost the production that you'd like to see.
Yeah, production's still growing right now, and activity's relatively high. Yeah, of course, if prices go lower from here, that's going to cause concerns among producers. But you got to think of the structural reasons why prices are going down. The Trump administration came in to unleash American energy. We're removing uncertainties around permitting. We're allowing pipelines to be built, export terminals. So you're clearly, these are signals that are going to increase supply, and they're going to increase supply because they're going to lower the cost of that supply. Of course, there's cyclical factors and uncertainties and economic concerns mixed in there as well. But central to President Trump's agenda is American energy.
Right. I mean, that was my question. Can he get, and he's part of this, he's been consistent, can he get the production, the drill baby drill going that he wants if there are recession concerns and ultimately that plays out? The companies aren't going to want to invest if that happens, are they?
Yeah, I mean, companies are going to invest based on prices and future views of prices and their cost structure. So the break-even cost, or the cost for a same return, will be lower under President Trump than it was under President Biden. But look, the government doesn't set prices. Nobody sets prices. That's supply and demand in the marketplace. But lower prices are good for consumers, and as producers get lower and lower cost structure, they're going to thrive at lower price levels as well.
What about the tariffs themselves? I know Canada and Mexico were sort of spared on the energy side, USMCA compliant, but China tariffing energy, like, do you see a big impact to the industry as a result of the higher tariff rates going back and forth?
Well, two things there. Number one, from the Trump administration, no tariffs on energy across the board. I think that's central. Energy is the infrastructure that enables everything else in our economy. And two big points on why President Trump's, what's the goals of his tariff policies? Sometimes we lose sight of the forest for the trees here. Two goals. One is to grow American exports abroad. Our trading partners often have more barriers to American products coming into their markets than their products coming into our markets. President Trump wants to open up markets abroad to grow American exports. These negotiations are set towards that end. And the second end is to reindustrialize our country. We've simply, over the last 20 years and several administrations, had more and more of our industry, our energy-intensive manufacturing, go overseas. President Trump is passionate about reindustrializing America, bringing those jobs in towns across America, rural America as well. and to get our economy, workers in our economy, thriving again. I think at the end of the day, we're going to have growing American exports and reindustrialize the country. This is great economic news. What you're seeing right now is the fear and uncertainty as the sausage is being made.
Mr. Secretary, on the executive order expected on coal, you're talking about maybe granting new federal mining rights and promoting coal, maybe reducing other regulations around it. I wonder what type of appetite, what demand you're expecting on this, either for new mining of coal when it's in general been in decline for a while, but also for AI data centers. I mean, all of these companies paying for the build out seem to want cleaner forms of energy and maybe wouldn't necessarily wish to have, coal powered, learning large language models.
Well, let me push back on a couple things.
America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight. The president,
अमेरिकी कंपनी कोलोसल बायोसाइंसेस के मुताबिक ये नायाब होने के बाद दोबारा पैदा किए जाने वाले डायर वुल्फ हैं। ये आखिरी बार 10,000 साल पहले देखे गए थे जब ये नस्ल नायाब हो गई थी। भेड़िए के इन बच्चों के नाम रोमुलस, रीमस और खलीसी हैं और इनकी उम्रें 3 से 6 माह के दरमियान हैं। इस कंपनी के मुताबिक इन्हें डायर वुल्फ्स के फॉसिल्स में मिलने वाले डीएनए और जेनेटिक इंजीनियरिंग की मदद से पैदा किया गया है।
तो ग्रे वुल्फ डायर वुल्फ का सबसे करीबी जीता जागता रिश्तेदार है। जेनेटिकली ये एक दूसरे।
मैं एक कहावत सुनी सी।
What do you make of China's response? What does it mean for the everyday American?
I mean, this is a refusal to back down. And I also think China is sending a message to other countries that they could be an alternative to these protectionist measures from the U.S. And what does that mean for consumers? It means likely that prices are going to go up. I mean, think about it. Just do the math. We just mentioned a 50% tariff.
That most visa-exempt travelers can use to fly into Canada or transit through Canada for up to 6 months. This program allows Canadian officials to conduct very light-touch pre-travel screening for eligible air travelers. It only costs $7 to apply, and most applications are approved automatically within a few minutes. An ETA is valid for up to 5 years or until the user's passport expires, whichever comes first. Today, I'm pleased to share that this new...
अभी हम एक फिल्म करेंगे फटे देंदे चक पंजाबी। वो फिल्म नहीं आई, उसमें गिप्पी गिरेवाल साहब थे। आज तक उस बात की मुझे समझ नहीं आई। नीरू बाजवा जी, नसीम विकी साहब, ठाकुर साहब, ये वो सारे। तो वो फिल्म रिलीज नहीं हुई, कोई लड़ाई होगी गिप्पी भाईजान की, ये वो फलां। अब मैं ना गिप्पी भाई के साथ बड़ी मोहब्बत हो गई। उन्होंने मुझे कहा तुम बहुत अच्छे फनकार हो। नसीम विकी साहब को कहा कि नहीं, ये उस्ताद हैं जी, हमने बड़ा कुछ सीखा, ब्ला 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 ब्ला। अब हम वापस आए, अब मैं फोन मिला, मैं कहा ठाकुर साहब गिप्पी भाई का नंबर तो मैंने देना। ठाकुर साहब ने उनका नंबर दिया, तो नंबर हो ही, मैं कहा तुसी मिलाना, उन्होंने डीपी शो रही, मेरा नंबर ब्लॉक। मैंने विक्की भाई को बोला, मैंने कहा विक्की भाई कहते यार गिप्पी, मैं कहा गिप्पी भाई ने गल हुई, विक्की भाई कहते नहीं यार मेरी भी नहीं हुई, मैं कर दा, तो उन्होंने भी डीपी शो नहीं हो रही।
विक्की साहब ने
जी विक्की भाई कहते उन्होंने नंबर चेंज कर लिया। मैं कहा नहीं भाई सानू दोनों ने ब्लॉक किया है। अभी हम एक फिल्म करेंगे फटे
भाई गुरप्रीत ये कैसे यहाँ पे बैठा है?
अरे ये सोचा था कनाडा आऊंगा, बैंचो मस्टैंगो में घूमूंगा, लोड़ा घूमूंगा, इधर कंस्ट्रक्शन के काम के अंदर आया हूँ। बैंचो सुबह सब्जी नहीं थी, चावल के अंदर क्या कहते हैं,
$30 billion in 3 years to move just 10% of the supply chain to the U.S.
$30 billion, 3 years to move 10%.
To move 10% of the supply chain.
Leaving 90%.
Leaving 90% over there. And for someone like myself,
我想美方的
The actions of the US side have not demonstrated any genuine willingness for serious dialogue. If the US truly wishes to engage in talks, it should adopt an attitude of equality, mutual respect and reciprocity. If it persists in disregarding the common interests of both countries and the international community and insists on escalating the trade and tariff conflict, China will, as always, fight to the end.
必将奉陪到底。我想美方的
The actions of the US side have not demonstrated any genuine willingness for serious dialogue.
हेलीकॉप्टर के नीचे 10 पंजाबी और 1 पठान लटक रहे थे और हेलीकॉप्टर खतरनाक हद तक झूल रहा था। बलूच पायलट ने ऐलान किया, तुम में से किसी एक को कुर्बानी देनी होगी ताकि वजन कम हो। ये सुनते ही सब पंजाबियों ने पठान की तरफ देखना शुरू कर दिया। पठान बोला, ठीक है, तुम लोग मेरे लिए तालियां बजाओ, मैं कुर्बानी देता हूं। जो ही पंजाबियों ने तालियां बजाएं, वो सब नीचे गिर गए। पठान मुस्कुराकर बोला, दिमाग निस्वार से चलता है, बड़ी डागरियों से नहीं। हेलीकॉप्टर के नीचे 10 पंजाबी
According to the IMF, Europe's internal market barriers, are equivalent to a tariff of 45% for manufacturing and 100% for services. This simply cannot be. This must change now. This is why I have tasked EVP Séjourné to come up with concrete and bold proposals next month to remove most of these barriers and prevent new ones. These reforms are long overdue and now they have become more urgent than ever. According to the IMF, Europe's internal market barriers,
टोटल कितने लोग आपके साथ गए, कितने करीबी?
Is it true that the government gives you money if you marry an Emirati as an Emirati?
Yes, they give money not only for the first wife, for the second, third, fourth one. Yes, it's really important for the economy. So we are not a huge population here. Something really good for the economy to have more people, more Emirati, so to carry this country and grow it more and more and more.
Is it true that the government gives you money if you marry an Emirati as an Emirati?
Yes.
नमस्ते सर, मैं ना गाड़ी देखने आई हूँ, आप मुझे कोई अच्छी सी बढ़िया सी गाड़ी दिखा दो।
हाँ जी नमस्ते जी।
A lot of Americans waking up this morning wondering what this all means, and the president's message to them over the weekend was essentially hang tough. It may not be easy though, with even bigger tariffs coming on the way, which could increase prices on everyday goods. But last night, Trump made clear he has not changed.
You're gonna have to tell your wife.
Guys, you know where we are? We're in Chongqing, China.
April 9th, the so-called retaliatory tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, I should say. Are those coming or are they open to negotiation?
The tariffs are coming. He announced it and he wasn't kidding. The tariffs are
China is leading the way with dark factories, fully automated manufacturing.
तो आप शराब रोज पीते हैं?
This is how I became a dispatcher.
Old phrases we still use today and where they originated from. During the Victorian era in the United Kingdom, working class people were highly taxed. So many people's goal was to try to avoid paying it as much as possible. There was a slang word for tax, which was scot, so anyone who successfully avoided paying tax were considered to have gotten away scot-free. Also, in the Victorian era, bakers were required by law to sell a full dozen loaves of bread, otherwise they would be punished for potentially ripping off customers. To make sure they never sold any bread short, the bakers would add an extra loaf to be on the safe side. And this is why today, a baker's dozen is 13 and not 12. In the early 1800s, rich people would often host dinner parties. If anybody at the party upset the host for any given reason, then the host would serve the unwanted guest a cold piece of meat, which was a polite way of telling them they are no longer welcome. This piece of meat was usually a shoulder, hence why we give the cold shoulder to somebody we would like to dismiss. In the 16th century, the popular nursery rhyme called Hey Diddle Diddle originated in England. In the rhyme it features a cow jumping over the moon as an expression of achievement. So in times of joy, people would refer back to this rhyme by saying they were over the moon. Old phrases we still use today and where they originated from.
Threatening 50% tariffs, extra tariffs today on China would mean that they had a 103% tariff, which means that China, to import something from China into the United States, you have to pay for it twice, and then a little bit on top, 3% on top. I mean, an intervention of such obvious madness that understanding its implementation probably involves understanding madness rather than understanding markets. 104% tariff, I beg your pardon, crucial difference. But that's bonkers, right? Threatening 50% tariffs, extra tariffs today on China would mean that they had a 103% tariff, which means that China, to import something from China into the United States, you have to pay for it twice, and then a little bit on top, 3% on top. I mean, an intervention of such obvious madness that understanding its implementation probably involves understanding madness rather than understanding markets. 104% tariff, I beg your pardon, crucial difference. But that's bonkers, right? Threatening 50% tariffs, extra tariffs today on China would mean that they had a 103% tariff, which means that China, to import something from China into the United States, you have to pay for it twice, and then a little bit on top, 3% on top. I mean, an intervention of such obvious madness that understanding its implementation probably involves understanding madness rather than understanding markets. 104% tariff, I beg your pardon, crucial difference. But that's bonkers, right? Threatening 50% tariffs, extra tariffs today on China would mean that they had a 103% tariff, which means that China, to import something from China into the United States.
अपने छोटे बच्चों को, how do you deal with a narcissistic personality style?
There's an initial mindset you need to have, and that is,
And understand what all the to-do is about reciprocal tariffs. My husband and I have traveled all over Europe, everywhere, all over Europe. I have yet to see one American-made vehicle in any European city. Why? Because the import tax is too high. And understand what all the to-do is about reciprocal tariffs. My husband and I have traveled all over Europe, everywhere, all over Europe. I have yet to see one American-made vehicle in any European city. Why? Because the import tax is too high. And understand what all the to-do is.
100,000 soldiers ascending the treacherous Alps. This was the greatest ambush ever attempted by a military leader. Hannibal Barca, a Carthaginian general fueled by vengeance.
President Bush always made sure that I had what I needed. I went into the White House that day to resign. And he said, the president would like to announce you as press secretary on Friday.
To Dana Perino, looking forward to working with you.
Soon after you became White House press secretary, the great financial crisis of 2008 hit.
More than 900 points. Does that make any sense?
President trading at 6 hands down. And you're hearing screaming, bye, bye.
You want me on your side in a crisis?
Dana Perino.
Dana Perino. Dana Perino.
As educated American women, there's really nothing we can't do. We just have to decide what we want to do. President Bush always made sure.
क्या बात है इतना परेशान क्यों हो? क्या बताऊं भाई? मैं आजकल अपनी बीवी से बहुत परेशान हूँ। मैं भी अल्लाह के डर की बीवी है ना।
The real economic story. Everybody is angry, everybody is fearful, and the good reason.
अगर आप कनाडा के प्रोविंस ओंटारियो में रहते हैं और आप फर्दर स्टडीज परस्यू करना चाहते हैं तो
Old words we still use today and where they originated from. In the 1700s, British sailors would have to go through daily inspections. They were told to line up along the seams of the top deck, with the toe of their shoes touching the line of the deck seam. This is where the common phrase to toe the line originates from. In ancient Rome, when two men wanted to make an allegiance or swear an oath with one another, they would do so by holding each other's testicles as a sign of trust. The holding of another man's testicles is where we get the word testify, which we use today when giving a formal statement under oath in a court. In the 1760s, in England, there was a lord named Lord Sandwich who loved to gamble. He was so obsessed with gambling that he would refuse to go for meals. So he would order his food in between two slices of bread so he could eat while playing. This is where the famous sandwich came from. The ancient Celtic tribes of modern-day Britain would have a priest known as a druid. These druids would organize massive fires as a celebration. They would often throw animal bones into the fire as a way to give the flame life. These bonfires is where the modern-day word bonfire comes from. Old words we still use today and where they originated from. In the 1700s, British sailors would have to go through daily inspections. They were told to line up along the seams of the top deck, with the toe of their shoes touching the
most stereotypical mom in each state, according to AI.
There's a long way between now and the 2026 elections. President Trump won based on two things.
104% tariffs on China. That could be the reality starting this week, according to President Trump.
I have a great relationship with President Xi. I hope it's going to stay that way. I have great respect for China, but they can't do this. We're going to have one shot at this, and no other president's going to do this, what I'm doing. And I'll tell you what, it's an honor to do it.
So how do we get to 104% tariff? To the math. First, you got to understand these are just the new tariffs being put on China since President Trump took office. There are already existing tariffs on certain Chinese imports coming into the United States.
Here as well, a little piece of ancient Chinese wisdom come in handy.
NATO is not in jeopardy. The only thing that puts NATO in jeopardy is the fact that we have NATO allies who barely have militaries, or whose militaries are not very capable because they've spent 40 years not spending any money on it. We've been NATO. And all President Trump has argued is what every president, every American president has argued for the last 30 years, and that is these are rich countries, especially in Western Europe. They have plenty of money. They should be investing that into national security, and they're not. You have countries spending 1.5%, 1% of their economy, and we just can't keep subsidizing that. It's not fair, and it's not sustainable.
He thinks that the U.S. wants out of Europe, do your own thing. Is he misreading Donald Trump?
No, we're not saying do your own thing. We're saying do more. It's their continent, right? Why should we not be? Why is it unreasonable for the United States to ask rich European countries to invest more money in their own national security? NATO is not in jeopardy. The only thing that puts NATO in jeopardy is the fact that we have NATO allies who barely have militaries, or whose militaries are not very capable because they've spent 40 years not spending any money on it. We've been NATO. And all President Trump has argued is what every president, every American president has argued for the last 30 years, and that is these are rich countries, especially in Western Europe. They have plenty of money. They should be investing that in the national security.
Bill, I think you and I agree both that this is risky, that winning is not a foregone conclusion, and that the stakes are extraordinarily high. Have we ever in history seen a president gamble in this way with the U.S. economy, with U.S. national security, with our prestige around the world and our influence by choice.
Herbert Hoover, Smoot-Hawley tariff. Didn't work out for Herb, but he gambled because he didn't know what to do after the stock market crashed in 1929. So in 1930, he slapped these humongous tariffs, hoping that Americans would be forced to buy just American and the industries would prosper, thereby the recession would recede. The opposite happened. But I think you've been a little too kind to President Trump tonight, Leila. The problem is that people are feeling pain. The American public's feeling pain.
Guy from what country you would never date?
Oh, maybe Korean man because of their stereotype. Egypt, maybe.
Guy from what country you would never date?
India.
Why?
Like the country, the foods, anything.
Iran.
Iran? Why?
Because I don't like their culture.
I would say India.
Why?
They have like specific smell.
India.
India? Why everyone is choosing India?
Also America.
From United States?
Yeah, they're just weird. Kind of creep me out sometimes.
Americans?
Yeah. India.
But why?
I don't know, just nuts. Pakistan.
Why?
I had bad experiences. That's it.
Pakistani?
Yeah.
Really?
Pakistanis, yeah, when I'm traveling, so.
Guy from what country you would never date?
USA.
United States?
Yes. I will go this summer in USA and maybe I will try.
Damn. But what country you wouldn't date?
Yeah, USA, yes, or Russia.
Guys, if you like Elena...
मेरे फादर मेरे पैसे दे बस तू जानता नहीं मैं कौन है बोल के देख अभी बताता हूँ मैं तेरे को मैं कौन हूँ कादर भाई को फोन लगाता हूँ हाँ कादर
अरे सत्तार भाई कैसे हैं आप
ठीक हूँ तेरे आदमी को धो रहा हूँ
अरे कोई नहीं ऐसा कह रहा मुझसे एक बार मिलता है अपने आप को मेरा आदमी मिलने लगता है आप जैसा चाहे वैसा करें
सुन लिया
भाई
देता हूँ भाई मेरे पैसे
U.S. tariffs have wounded China.
Carnage, panic, bloodbath doesn't even begin to cut it.
Chinese markets deep in the red. Now Hong Kong stocks plunged the most in almost 3 decades.
In its first day of trading after the weekend, the Shanghai Composite fell more than 7 percentage points. That's, let's call it, somewhere in the ballpark of $500 billion in value, wiped out in one day. The Hang Seng, a measure of top stocks in the Hong Kong market, that was down more than 13%. That's another few $100 billion in value gone. And Donald Trump's not done. Because on top of a 10% tariff on Chinese goods imposed in February, plus another 10% in March, plus 34% announced last week, he's just threatened an additional 50%, which altogether effectively doubles the import cost of all Chinese goods to the U.S.
We're starting to get to the point where if all these are applied, you effectively create an embargo between the two countries where there's just going to be no trade.
Trump is punishing China for hitting back. In a trade war, the U.S. has escalated. Yesterday, Trump says, China issued retaliatory tariffs of 34%. If China does not withdraw its 34% increase, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. But China has found a way to hit the U.S. back hard. And not just with tariffs, but by attacking its supply chain directly.
They just threw down the gauntlet.
It's now a game of chicken. It's who's going to blink first.
China is messaging this quite clearly. They are in it until the end.
China has, until now, attempted to exercise restraint. Months ago, when Trump first imposed that sweeping 10% tariff on Chinese goods coming into the U.S., China did retaliate, but with smaller sector-specific tariffs, mainly targeting U.S. energy, coal, LNG, that sort of thing. Then, when the U.S. stacked another 10% tariff on China, once again, we saw a measured response, this time against U.S. agriculture, targeting very specific things like chicken and beef, but responding to Trump's additional 34% tariff announced last week.
So we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset?
Well, they're upset. Retaliating with an equivalent 34% tariff on American goods. This is China hitting back harder than before.
The Chinese believe the U.S. has just gone to a whole nother level, basically gutting the rules-based order entirely and replacing it with reciprocal tariffs negotiated line by line, country by country. And that's a world in which it'll be much, much harder for them to operate.
They want these tariffs to go away, but if they can't go away, they do not want to be perceived as weak.
But China knows hitting the U.S. back with tariffs doesn't land quite the same way as the original blow against China. The trade math illustrates why. If we're talking about the physical things the two countries ship back and forth, in 2024, the U.S. sold China just over $140 billion worth of goods, but it bought almost $440 billion of product, meaning a 34% tariff on Chinese goods, that has a bigger impact than that same tariff going the other way. So China didn't stop at just the tariff.
Well, China raised the stakes. It announced a raft of countermeasures, export curbs on tungsten and other rare metals.
China controls about 90% of the world's known supply of what are called rare earths, as in the stuff that makes electric engines run and fighter jets fly. They are the elements of the periodic table, some of which you likely never bothered to learn because they had such wildly arcane names like dysprosium and ytterbium. But if you're building an electric vehicle and you need a way to keep your neodymium magnets from weakening under extreme temperatures, you are heat-proofing with dysprosium. If U.S. Marines are carrying out a nighttime raid and those soldiers need night vision goggles, you're converting infrared light into something visible with terbium. China recently added 7 new categories of rare earths to a list of controlled materials, which now requires U.S. companies that need them to get a license for them.
You should see these new additions to China's export control regime for critical minerals not as more paperwork that will result in additional exports of these, but is essentially a ban.
They're realizing that they don't have to respond on the same level playing field of tariff for tariff. Instead, they have other tools they can use to impose costs on the United States.
This latest move adds to a growing list of rare earths China has either restricted or actually banned the export of to the United States. And experts say China has tailored this list of raw materials to exactly what the U.S. needs. Some American aerospace manufacturers, for example, build avionics using materials that are sole sourced from China.
It's a real choke point. The U.S. and others have stockpiles, but they will go through those stockpiles relatively quickly. And the Chinese are counting on this being one pressure point to get the U.S. to back off or to sit down.
And if you want to understand what direction China's actions are taking the country, it's also worth paying attention to their words, branding U.S. tariffs as abuse, which severely infringes upon the legitimate rights and interests of all countries, severely violates World Trade Organization rules, severely undermines the rules-based multilateral trading system, and severely disrupts the global economic order. It goes on to warn economic bullying that shifts risks onto others will ultimately backfire.
They've been accusing the U.S. of bullying ever since the initial trade war. They want to be respected. They want to feel like they can have a two-sided, not a one-sided negotiation over these issues, and they don't want to feel threatened by the U.S.
Well, China is on the one hand obviously having to take a more assertive posturing against U.S. escalation. China is also essentially appealing to the rest of the world.
Trump believes China has badly cheated the United States. He accuses China of flooding world markets with unfairly subsidized cheap goods, which wreaks havoc on a country's ability to manufacture and provide for itself because they just can't compete.